Ladies and gentlemen, please, I have an announcement. This gala is funded by stolen money.
The room looked perfect. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath golden chandeliers. Expensive suits filled the ballroom. Laughter echoed from table to table. Family members smiled for photographs. Friends raised champagne flutes in celebration. From the outside, it looked like the kind of evening people would remember for all the right reasons. But in less than 5 minutes, one woman would say a few simple words that would bring an entire family to its knees. A family that believed they had won. A husband who thought he had secured his future. Parents who believed they controlled everything. To understand how everything reached that moment in the ballroom, we have to go back several years before the younger woman carrying the newborn baby ever stepped through those doors. Long before the whispers, the humiliation, and the family celebrations that seemed designed to push Emily Carter out of her own marriage, there was a very different story unfolding. Emily was not the woman people believed she was. In fact, one of the greatest advantages she ever had was that people consistently underestimated her. She was born into a family that valued privacy above everything else. While many wealthy families displayed their success through extravagant homes, luxury vacations, and public attention, Emily's family followed a completely different philosophy. They believed real wealth worked best when nobody knew it existed. Her grandfather had spent decades building a collection of commercial properties throughout several states. What began as a single investment eventually grew into a network of office buildings, apartment complexes, and business centers that quietly generated millions of dollars every year. By the time Emily inherited her share of the family holdings, she already possessed more financial security than most people could accumulate in several lifetimes. Yet she never talked about it. She drove ordinary cars, lived modestly, and avoided conversations about money whenever possible. Most people assumed she was simply a humble woman. The reality was far more significant. When Emily first met Michael Carter, she genuinely believed she had found someone who loved her for who she was rather than what she owned. Michael was charming, confident, and seemed completely uninterested in financial status. He made her laugh. He listened when she spoke. He remembered small details about her life that even close friends sometimes forgot. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future built on trust rather than caution. Their relationship developed quickly. Friends described them as the perfect couple. Family members praised their chemistry. Even Emily's relatives, who were usually skeptical of outsiders, appeared comfortable with Michael. The wedding itself was elegant without being excessive. Guests watched as the couple exchanged vows and promised to build a life together. Looking back years later, many people would point to that wedding day as the beginning of the story. But the truth is that the first warning signs appeared shortly after the honeymoon ended. At first, the changes were subtle. Michael's mother, Patricia Carter, began asking harmless questions. She wanted to know details about Emily's family. She wanted to understand how much property they owned and whether Emily had any business interests. The questions seemed innocent enough. Many families discuss finances, especially when marriages are involved. Emily answered politely while keeping certain details private. Patricia appeared dissatisfied with those answers. A few weeks later, the questions returned. This time they were more specific. Then they became more frequent. Before long, nearly every family gathering included some discussion related to money, inheritance, investments, or ownership. Emily noticed the pattern immediately, but she chose not to react. She believed patience would solve the problem. She believed that once everyone became comfortable with each other, the curiosity would eventually disappear. Instead, it intensified. Patricia Carter was accustomed to controlling every major decision within her family. For years, relatives sought her approval before making important choices. She enjoyed being the center of influence. She enjoyed knowing that people depended on her guidance. Emily's independence created a problem Patricia did not know how to solve. Unlike other family members, Emily rarely asked for advice. She handled her own affairs quietly and efficiently. She maintained professional relationships outside the family and never discussed her private finances. What Patricia viewed as secrecy was actually discretion, but that distinction meant very little to someone determined to uncover information. Over time, Patricia became convinced that Emily was intentionally hiding something. Unfortunately, she was right about that part. Emily was hiding something. The difference was that Patricia completely misunderstood what it was. Months passed, and the atmosphere within the family slowly changed. Comments became less friendly. Small insults appeared disguised as jokes. During holiday dinners, certain relatives would make remarks about Emily's background or question whether she contributed enough to the marriage. Michael usually remained silent during these moments. At first, Emily assumed he was trying to avoid conflict. Later, she began to suspect something else. His silence was becoming a habit. The man who once defended her without hesitation now seemed increasingly comfortable allowing others to criticize her. Every time it happened, Emily told herself it was temporary. Every marriage faces challenges. Every family experiences disagreements. She wanted to believe things could improve. What she did not know was that conversations were already taking place behind closed doors. Conversations involving Michael, Patricia Carter, and several relatives who had started viewing Emily as an obstacle rather than a member of the family. One evening, after a family gathering had ended, Emily accidentally overheard part of a conversation that was never intended for her ears. She had returned to retrieve a handbag she had forgotten in another room when she heard voices coming from a partially open study door. At first, she paid little attention. Then she heard her name. She stopped. The discussion inside was calm but revealing. Patricia was questioning why Michael continued protecting a marriage that, in her opinion, no longer benefited the family. Another relative suggested that Michael deserved someone more supportive, someone more cooperative, someone who understood the importance of family interests. Emily stood frozen as the implications slowly became clear. They were not discussing how to strengthen the marriage. They were discussing how to replace her. The realization hit harder than any argument ever could. Yet instead of confronting them immediately, Emily quietly walked away. She needed answers before she needed confrontation. And from that day forward, she began paying closer attention to everything happening around her. What Emily eventually discovered would confirm every fear she had tried to ignore. Michael was changing. The distance between them grew larger with each passing month. Business trips became more frequent. Phone calls became shorter. Excuses multiplied. Important conversations were postponed. Meanwhile, Patricia Carter appeared unusually confident, as though she knew something Emily did not. Then a new name started appearing in conversations. Rachel Brooks. At first, Emily heard the name only occasionally. Then she began seeing it more often. Family members mentioned Rachel during gatherings. Patricia praised her character. Michael suddenly had reasons to attend events where Rachel happened to be present. Individually, each incident seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern that became impossible to ignore. Emily could feel something changing around her, but she still did not know how far the situation had progressed. The answer would arrive sooner than she expected, and when it did, it would force her to make a decision that would ultimately change the future of every person involved. And a younger woman who had just walked into a marriage she never truly understood. By the end of that night, the truth would leave every person in that room questioning everything they thought they knew. And the most shocking part of all was that the woman everyone pitied had been holding all the power from the very beginning. A younger woman suddenly appeared at the entrance holding a newborn baby wrapped in a soft white blanket. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Smiles faded. Glasses froze halfway to people's lips. The room became so quiet that the faint sound of the baby's breathing seemed louder than the music itself. Every eye followed her as she confidently stepped inside. Then, as if guided by instinct, every person in the room turned toward the same woman sitting near the center table. Emily Carter. For years, Emily had been the subject of whispers. She was the wife people claimed had tolerated more humiliation than any person should ever accept. Guests expected tears. They expected shouting. They expected a public breakdown. Instead, Emily slowly placed her glass on the table, looked around the room, and smiled. It was not the smile of a defeated woman. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret nobody else knew. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What happened next would become the kind of story people talked about for years. Emily stood up from her chair with a calmness that confused everyone watching. Her husband, Michael Carter, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His parents exchanged nervous glances. The younger woman holding the baby appeared confident, almost proud, as though she had finally arrived at a destination she had spent months trying to reach. Then Emily cleared her throat, and spoke words that would completely change the direction of the evening. Before we continue this celebration, there's something this family should know. The sentence itself sounded harmless, yet something about the way she said it sent a chill through the room. It was the certainty in her voice, the complete absence of fear, the strange confidence of a woman who seemed completely unaffected by the scene unfolding around her. Nobody in that room understood what was about to happen because nobody truly understood Emily Carter. They thought they knew her story. They thought she was simply a loyal wife desperately trying to hold together a broken marriage. They believed she stayed because she had nowhere else to go. They assumed she tolerated disrespect because she depended on her husband's family. For years, those assumptions had gone unchallenged. Emily rarely defended herself. She rarely corrected anyone. When people underestimated her, she simply allowed them to continue believing whatever made them comfortable. That quiet silence eventually became the foundation of one of the biggest mistakes the Carter family would ever make. Because while they spent years judging her value, they never stopped to ask why a woman like Emily remained so calm while everything around her seemed to fall apart. The truth is that this story did not begin in that ballroom. It began years earlier, long before the marriage started showing cracks. Long before another woman entered the picture. Long before family members started choosing sides. To understand why everyone looked so shocked that night, you first have to understand who Emily Carter really was. And that is where this story takes an unexpected turn. Because the woman sitting quietly at that table was hiding a truth so enormous that even her own husband failed to recognize it. A truth connected to money, power, loyalty, and a carefully guarded secret that had remained hidden throughout her entire marriage. The Carter family believed they were preparing to replace Emily. What they didn't realize was that the very foundation beneath their feet belonged to her. And by the time they finally discovered the truth, there would be no way to stop what came next. As the months passed, Rachel Brooks became impossible to ignore. What began as occasional mentions during family conversations soon developed into something much more obvious. Emily Carter noticed that Patricia Carter spoke about Rachel with a level of admiration she had never shown toward her own daughter-in-law. At family dinners, Rachel's accomplishments became a regular topic. During holiday gatherings, someone always seemed to find a reason to mention her. If Rachel received a promotion, the family celebrated it. If Rachel attended a charity event, everyone heard about it. If Rachel posted photographs online, Patricia somehow found a way to bring them into conversation. At first, Emily tried to convince herself she was imagining the pattern. After all, families discuss friends and acquaintances all the time. But deep down, she knew this was different. The praise felt deliberate. The timing felt intentional. More importantly, Michael Carter never appeared surprised when Rachel's name surfaced. In fact, he often seemed prepared for those conversations before they even started. That detail stayed with Emily long after each gathering ended. One evening, while attending a family fundraiser, Emily finally met Rachel Brooks in person. Rachel was younger than she expected, confident, well-spoken, charming in the way people often are when they understand exactly how they want to be perceived. Throughout the event, Patricia remained close to Rachel's side, introducing her to relatives, business associates, and family friends. Emily observed everything quietly. She noticed the approving smiles. She noticed the way certain relatives watched her reactions. Most importantly, she noticed how comfortable Michael appeared around Rachel. There was a familiarity between them that immediately caught her attention. Nothing inappropriate happened that evening. There were no dramatic confrontations or obvious signs of betrayal. Yet Emily left with a growing sense that she was witnessing the early stages of something carefully planned. The people around her were behaving as though Rachel already belonged within the family. The only person who seemed unaware of the arrangement was the woman whose marriage stood directly in its path. Over the following year, the situation became increasingly difficult to ignore. Michael spent more time away from home. Business meetings stretched late into the night. Weekend obligations appeared unexpectedly. Excuses arrived with such frequency that they eventually stopped sounding believable. Emily considered confronting him several times, but each time she hesitated. She wanted certainty before making accusations. She wanted facts rather than suspicions. What she discovered instead was something even more painful. Through mutual acquaintances and quiet inquiries, Emily learned that Michael and Rachel had been spending significant amounts of time together outside family events. Restaurants, conferences, social gatherings. None of it proved an affair on its own, but the pattern painted a picture that became harder to dismiss with each passing week. The husband who once insisted on complete honesty now seemed determined to keep large portions of his life hidden from her. The emotional weight of those discoveries could have broken many people. Yet Emily responded differently. Instead of reacting emotionally, she became methodical. She began documenting everything: dates, conversations, financial records, changes in behavior, public interactions. She organized information the same way her grandfather had taught her to manage business assets: carefully, quietly, and with extraordinary attention to detail. The more she learned, the clearer the situation became. This was no longer simply a troubled marriage. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple members of the Carter family. Whether Rachel fully understood her role remained unclear, but Patricia certainly did. So did Michael. They believed Emily would eventually become frustrated enough to leave voluntarily. They expected her to walk away quietly, allowing them to avoid the financial and social consequences of a public divorce. What they failed to understand was that Emily had no intention of making their plan easy. While the Carter family focused on replacing Emily, they remained completely unaware of what she was doing behind the scenes. For years, they had assumed Michael was the primary source of stability within the marriage. They assumed his career supported their lifestyle. They assumed the family's growing reputation resulted from his success. Those assumptions existed because Emily had never corrected them. She had never revealed the true structure of the assets surrounding them: the luxury home where family gatherings took place, the investment accounts that funded major purchases, several commercial properties generating substantial revenue, the business entities connected to those holdings. All of it remained hidden beneath layers of legal agreements established years before her marriage. Emily had maintained that privacy for one reason: she wanted relationships based on trust rather than financial influence. Ironically, that decision had created the perfect conditions for the Carter family's greatest mistake. Then came the moment that removed any remaining doubt. During an intimate family gathering, Patricia Carter made a statement she believed would pressure Emily into submission. Speaking in front of several relatives, she remarked that every family eventually has to decide who truly belongs and who does not. The room fell quiet. The comment appeared directed at no one in particular, yet everyone understood its target. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Michael remained silent. Rachel Brooks sat nearby, avoiding eye contact. Emily looked around the room and saw something that changed her perspective forever. Nobody intended to stop this. Nobody intended to defend her. The decision had already been made, at least in their minds. In that moment, Emily realized she was no longer fighting for acceptance within the Carter family. She was simply watching people reveal their true character. And once she accepted that reality, her fear disappeared. Shortly afterward, news spread through the family that Rachel Brooks was expecting a baby. The announcement triggered celebrations almost immediately. Patricia Carter treated the news as though it marked the beginning of a new chapter. Relatives congratulated Michael. Friends whispered excitedly about the future. Family members who had once pretended to remain neutral suddenly became openly supportive. The shift happened so quickly that it almost felt rehearsed. Emily watched the celebrations unfold with remarkable calm. Many people interpreted that calmness as surrender. They believed she had finally accepted defeat. They believed years of pressure had broken her spirit. In reality, the opposite was happening. For the first time since discovering the truth, Emily felt completely certain about what needed to be done. The pieces were finally in place. The evidence was complete. The legal reviews were finished. And the Carter family was so distracted by their own victory that they never noticed the ground beneath them beginning to move. Weeks later, invitations were sent for a grand family celebration. Friends, relatives, business associates, and longtime acquaintances were all encouraged to attend. Patricia Carter personally oversaw much of the planning. Rachel Brooks would be there. The baby would be there. Michael would stand proudly beside them. To everyone involved, the event represented a public confirmation of the future they had chosen. It was meant to demonstrate that the family had moved forward. What nobody realized was that Emily Carter had already made plans of her own. While guests prepared for an evening of celebration, she prepared for an evening of truth. And when she walked into that ballroom, she carried something far more powerful than anger, heartbreak, or revenge. She carried documents, evidence, ownership records, Years of carefully protected information. By the time the night ended, every assumption the Carter family had relied upon would collapse. The celebration they had spent months organizing was about to become the very stage where their entire world unraveled. The evening of the celebration arrived with the kind of confidence that only comes from people who believe they have already won. Guests filled the ballroom long before the official program began. Conversations flowed effortlessly between family friends, business associates, and relatives who had traveled from different parts of the country. The atmosphere felt almost triumphant. Patricia Carter moved through the room greeting guests as though she were hosting the most important event in the family's history. Michael Carter appeared relaxed, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with a smile that seemed impossible to erase. Rachel Brooks remained close by, holding the newborn baby while receiving endless compliments from those eager to welcome her into what they believed would soon become her permanent place within the family. Everywhere Emily Carter looked, she saw people celebrating a future they assumed was already secured. What made the scene remarkable was not the confidence displayed by the Carter family. It was the complete absence of concern. Nobody appeared worried about Emily. Nobody seemed interested in her thoughts or feelings. In their minds, her role in the story had already ended. She was simply present because appearances required it. Several guests offered polite greetings before quickly returning their attention to Michael and Rachel. Others barely acknowledged her existence at all. Years earlier, such treatment would have hurt deeply. On this particular evening, however, Emily experienced something entirely different. Relief. For the first time, she no longer felt any pressure to maintain illusions. The family had revealed exactly how they viewed her. Their intentions were now impossible to misunderstand. And because everything was finally out in the open, Emily no longer needed to protect anyone from the consequences of their own decisions. As the event continued, Patricia Carter eventually stepped forward to address the room. Her speech was filled with carefully chosen words about family, growth, legacy, and new beginnings. Guests applauded frequently. Rachel Brooks smiled. Michael nodded proudly beside her. Several people even wiped away emotional tears as Patricia described the importance of welcoming a new generation into the family. To many in attendance, it sounded like a touching celebration. To Emily, it sounded like the final chapter of a story built upon arrogance and assumptions. She listened patiently while Patricia spoke about unity. She listened while relatives praised loyalty. She listened while people applauded a future they believed belonged entirely to them. Then the speech ended. Glasses were raised. Smiles widened. And Patricia invited everyone to continue enjoying the evening. That was the moment Emily Carter slowly rose from her chair. The movement was so simple that most people barely noticed at first. A few conversations continued. Guests reached for drinks. Others checked their phones. Then Emily calmly requested everyone's attention. Something in her voice immediately changed the energy of the room. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Michael looked confused. Patricia appeared irritated by the interruption. Rachel tightened her grip on the baby and shifted nervously. Emily waited until the room became completely silent before speaking again. There was no anger in her tone, no bitterness, no desperation. The calmness was what unsettled people most. It was the calmness of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. Before we continue this celebration, there's something this family should know. The words echoed across the room exactly as they had in the opening moments of this story. Guests exchanged uncertain glances. Michael forced a smile, apparently expecting a brief emotional statement. Patricia folded her arms impatiently. Emily reached into a leather folder resting beside her chair and removed several documents. The sight immediately drew attention. People leaned forward. Some guests exchanged curious looks. Others assumed she intended to announce a divorce or perhaps publicly confront Michael about his relationship with Rachel. What happened instead was something nobody expected. Emily began with the house. Not the marriage. Not the affair. Not the betrayal. The house. She calmly explained that the property where many family events had been held over the years was legally owned through a trust established long before her marriage. Several guests appeared confused. Others seemed uninterested. Then she revealed the name listed as the controlling beneficiary of that trust. Her name, Emily Carter. A ripple of uncertainty moved through the room. Michael's expression changed slightly. Patricia's smile disappeared. Emily continued before anyone could interrupt. She explained that the mortgage had never been paid by Michael. The renovations had never been funded by the Carter family. The property taxes had never come from family accounts. Every major expense connected to the home had originated from assets she controlled. For years, people had assumed Michael provided the lifestyle they enjoyed. The reality was very different. Patricia quickly attempted to dismiss the information. One property, she argued, proved nothing. Emily nodded. Then she opened another folder. This time she began discussing investment portfolios, business holdings, commercial real estate, revenue-generating properties, partnership agreements, ownership structures. With each document she revealed, the atmosphere inside the ballroom became heavier. Guests who had been smiling moments earlier now sat in stunned silence. Several business associates quietly examined copies of records passed between tables. Names, signatures, dates, and ownership percentages left little room for debate. One by one, assumptions collapsed. Assets the Carter family had publicly treated as their own were connected directly to Emily. Companies Michael frequently referenced during conversations existed because of capital originating from Emily's holdings. Projects family members proudly discussed had been financed through entities she controlled. The deeper she went, the worse the situation became. Michael's confidence vanished completely. Patricia's face turned pale. Rachel Brooks looked around the room as though she had suddenly realized she had entered a story she did not fully understand. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Emily calmly explained that the company responsible for supporting much of the family's current lifestyle was not controlled by Michael Carter at all. In fact, Michael occupied a position that could be terminated at any time by the actual ownership group, and the majority ownership belonged to Emily. The room erupted into disbelief. Several guests openly questioned whether the documents were real. Others demanded explanations. Michael attempted to speak, but struggled to find words. For years, he had allowed people to believe he stood at the center of the family's financial success. Now, surrounded by evidence, that image was collapsing in front of everyone he knew. Yet Emily still wasn't finished. She paused long enough for the reality to settle over the room. Then she revealed something even more devastating. Months before the celebration, after consulting attorneys and financial advisors, she had quietly reviewed every agreement connected to the family's shared assets. During that review, she discovered transactions, communications, and decisions that the silence inside the ballroom felt heavier than any argument that had ever taken place within the Carter family. Just minutes earlier, guests had been celebrating what they believed was the beginning of a new chapter. Now many of those same people sat motionless, struggling to process everything they had just heard. Michael Carter remained frozen in his seat. Patricia Carter stared at the documents spread across nearby tables as though she expected them to suddenly disappear. Rachel Brooks looked overwhelmed, her attention shifting between Michael, Patricia, and the growing number of guests whispering among themselves. The newborn baby in her arms had become the only person in the room untouched by the tension. Emily Carter stood calmly before them all, showing no sign of satisfaction or anger. She had not come there seeking revenge. She had come for something much simpler: the truth. For years, Emily had listened while others rewrote her story. She had watched people create versions of her life that suited their assumptions. Some believed she was weak. Others believed she was dependent. Many assumed she stayed in the marriage because she lacked options. Yet every false narrative shared one thing in common. None of them reflected reality. The woman standing before them now was not revealing new facts about herself. She was simply removing the curtain that had hidden those facts from everyone else. And the more the room learned, the clearer it became that the Carter family had spent years making decisions based on information that was completely wrong. Emily allowed several moments to pass before speaking again. When she finally continued, her voice remained steady. "There is one more thing you should all understand." The room became quiet once more. Several guests instinctively leaned forward. Michael lowered his eyes. Patricia appeared almost afraid to hear what came next. Emily explained that many years before meeting Michael Carter, her grandfather had established a series of legal protections designed to preserve family assets. Those protections were not unusual among families managing substantial wealth across multiple generations. Trusts were created. Ownership structures were carefully organized. Certain conditions govern access to major holdings. At the time, Emily had viewed those arrangements as little more than administrative details. As she grew older, however, she came to appreciate why they existed. They were not designed to protect money from strangers. They were designed to protect families from making emotional decisions that could threaten everything previous generations had worked to build. Then Emily revealed something nobody in the room expected. Shortly before her wedding, several attorneys had strongly encouraged her to create additional safeguards surrounding her inheritance. They recommended formal agreements that would prevent disputes if circumstances ever changed. At the time, Emily felt uncomfortable with the idea. She trusted Michael completely. She believed their marriage would last forever. The thought of planning for failure felt unnecessary and even insulting. Yet after considerable discussion, she eventually agreed. And that decision changed everything. Because hidden within those agreements was a provision few people knew existed. A provision specifically designed to address situations involving deception, financial misconduct, or attempts to gain control of protected assets through manipulation. The moment Emily mentioned that clause, several attorneys attending the event immediately understood the significance. Michael understood too. His expression changed instantly. The confidence he had spent years projecting disappeared entirely. Guests watched as realization slowly spread across his face. He already knew what Emily was about to say. The agreements had never been forgotten. He had simply hoped they would never become relevant. Emily explained that after reviewing the evidence gathered over the previous year, legal counsel determined the conditions necessary to activate those protections had already been met. As a result, a series of actions had been initiated weeks before the celebration ever took place. Ownership interests had been secured. Access permissions had been modified. Financial authorities had been updated. Several business arrangements connected to Michael Carter's position were already under review. The room erupted into whispers. People looked toward Michael, waiting for a response. None came, because every word Emily spoke was supported by documentation. Every claim had been verified. Every step had already been completed. This was not a warning. It was an announcement. Patricia Carter finally stood up. For the first time that evening, the woman who had controlled so many family decisions appeared shaken. She demanded to know why Emily had remained silent for so long. Why she had allowed the family to continue believing things that were not true. Why she had waited until this moment to reveal everything. Many guests seemed eager to hear the answer. Emily looked directly at Patricia before responding. Then she said something nobody in that room would ever forget. I remained silent because the truth reveals character better than arguments ever could. The statement struck the room with incredible force. Emily continued. If she had confronted people years earlier, they would have denied their intentions. If she had revealed her wealth immediately, they would have changed their behavior. If she had defended herself every time she was criticized, nobody would have exposed who they truly were. But by remaining silent, she had learned everything she needed to know. She learned who valued loyalty. She learned who valued opportunity. She learned who stood beside her only when they believed she had something to offer. And she learned exactly how far some people were willing to go when they believed they could benefit from someone else's success. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Because deep down, many people in that room knew she was right. Then Emily turned toward Rachel Brooks. The younger woman looked terrified, not because she feared Emily, but because she was beginning to understand the full picture. For months, perhaps even years, she had been told a particular version of events. She had likely heard stories about a failing marriage, about a wife who no longer cared, about a relationship that existed only on paper. Now, sitting in front of overwhelming evidence, Rachel was discovering that reality was far more complicated than she had been led to believe. Emily surprised everyone with what she said next. For several long moments, nobody spoke. The celebration that had begun with laughter, applause, and congratulations now felt like a courtroom without a judge. Every person in the ballroom seemed trapped inside the same realization. The story they had believed for years was collapsing right in front of them. Michael Carter sat motionless, staring at the documents that had destroyed the image he had spent so long building. Patricia Carter, once the unquestioned authority within the family, appeared smaller than anyone had ever seen her. Rachel Brooks remained seated quietly, holding the newborn baby while trying to process information that seemed to arrive faster than she could understand it. And standing at the center of it all was Emily Carter, the woman everyone had underestimated. The irony was impossible to ignore. For years, members of the Carter family had treated Emily as though she depended on them. They spoke about her as though she needed their approval. They acted as though they controlled her future. Yet the truth revealed something completely different. Their comfort, their lifestyle, their social standing, and many of the opportunities they enjoyed had been connected to resources Emily brought into the marriage. Resources she never used as leverage. Resources she never bragged about. Resources she never weaponized against anyone. The more guests reflected on the situation, the more uncomfortable they became. Because Emily's silence had not been weakness. It had been restraint. Then something happened that nobody expected. One of Michael Carter's longtime friends slowly stood up from his chair. The room turned toward him. For years, he had been one of Michael's closest allies. If anyone was expected to defend him, it was this man. Instead, he looked directly at Michael and asked a simple question. When exactly were you planning to tell everyone the truth? The question struck harder than any accusation. Because it wasn't directed at Emily. It was directed at Michael. For the first time that evening, someone was demanding answers from him. Not from the wife who had been betrayed. Not from the woman holding documents. From the man who had spent years allowing everyone to believe a carefully constructed version of reality. Michael opened his mouth as if preparing to respond. Then he stopped. Because there was no answer that could repair the damage. No explanation capable of justifying everything that had happened. No excuse strong enough to erase years of decisions. The silence itself became an answer. Around the room, guests began looking at Michael differently. Not with admiration. Not with respect. But with disappointment. The kind of disappointment that appears when people realize someone they trusted was never the person they claimed to be. Patricia Carter recognized the shift immediately. For years, reputation had been one of the family's most valuable assets. Status mattered. Appearances mattered. Public perception mattered. She had spent decades carefully protecting the Carter name. Now, in a single evening, that reputation was slipping away. Not because Emily had attacked the family. Not because she had exaggerated facts. But because the truth had finally reached people who had never heard it before. As the room absorbed everything that had happened, Emily calmly gathered several documents and returned them to her folder. To the surprise of many guests, she showed no interest in extending the confrontation. She had said what needed to be said. The evidence spoke for itself. Continuing the argument would serve no purpose. But before she could sit down, another voice interrupted. Rachel Brooks. The younger woman slowly rose to her feet. Every eye in the ballroom immediately turned toward her. The room became silent once again. Throughout the evening, Rachel had spoken very little. Most people assumed she was simply overwhelmed by the unfolding events. Now it appeared she had something to say. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled slightly. Not from anger, from uncertainty. She admitted that many of the things she had learned that evening were completely new to her. She admitted she had been told the marriage between Michael Carter and Emily Carter was effectively over long before she entered the picture. She admitted she believed certain stories because she trusted the people telling them. As she spoke, Michael lowered his head. Patricia looked away. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Because whether Rachel had made mistakes or not, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. She had not been given the complete truth either. Rachel then asked Michael a question that stunned everyone. Did you ever intend to tell me any of this? The room froze. Michael looked up slowly. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he might finally offer an explanation. Instead, he remained silent. Again, that silence told Rachel everything she needed to know. And judging from the expressions around the room, it told everyone else as well. Emily watched the exchange without interruption. She understood something many people did not. The consequences unfolding that night were not created by documents. They were created by choices. Years of choices. Small decisions repeated over time until they eventually became impossible to hide. That was the real story. Not wealth. Not property. Not business ownership. Choices. The choices people make when they believe nobody is paying attention. The choices people make when they think they will never be held accountable. And the choices people make when they mistake kindness for weakness. Eventually, several guests began quietly leaving the ballroom. Not because the event was over, but because they no longer wished to be part of what had become an uncomfortable public reckoning. The atmosphere had changed completely. Hours earlier, People arrived expecting a celebration. Now they were leaving with lessons about trust, loyalty, and consequences. As more guests departed, the Carter family found themselves increasingly isolated. The support they once assumed would always exist was disappearing. One conversation at a time. One handshake at a time. One silent departure at a time. And for the first time in years, Patricia Carter found herself unable to control the narrative. No speech could fix this. No explanation could undo it. No amount of influence could erase what people had witnessed with their own eyes. Then Emily Carter did something that surprised everyone. She looked directly at Michael. The room immediately grew quiet again. Many people expected anger. Others expected one final confrontation. Instead, Emily spoke calmly. She told him that despite everything, she genuinely hoped he would eventually understand what had been lost. Not the assets, not the properties, not the business interests. Those things could always be rebuilt. What could not be rebuilt so easily was trust. Once trust disappears, every relationship becomes fragile. Every promise becomes questionable. Every word becomes difficult to believe. That was the true cost of everything that had happened. And it was far greater than money. Michael looked at her, but said nothing. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The wealth he thought mattered most had never been the most valuable thing he possessed. The most valuable thing had been sitting beside him for years, supporting him, believing in him, trusting him. And now that trust was gone, perhaps forever. As the evening slowly came to an end, Emily Carter picked up her folder and prepared to leave the ballroom. The same guests who had barely acknowledged her earlier now stepped aside respectfully as she walked past. Some nodded quietly. Others offered brief words of support. A few simply watched in silence. Most people would assume the story ended when Emily Carter walked out of the ballroom. After all, the truth had been revealed. The documents had been presented. The lies had collapsed. The guests had witnessed everything with their own eyes. It would have been the perfect ending. But real life rarely ends the moment people expect it to. In many ways, what happened after that night would prove even more revealing than the confrontation itself. Because once the crowd disappeared, once the applause was gone, and once there was nobody left to impress, every person involved was forced to confront the reality of what their choices had created. The days following the celebration were unlike anything the Carter family had experienced before. For years, Patricia Carter had been accustomed to controlling conversations. She could shape opinions, influence decisions, and guide how events were perceived by relatives and friends. This time was different. Too many people had witnessed the truth firsthand. Too many respected professionals had confirmed the validity of Emily Carter's claims. The story spread quickly through social circles, business communities, and family networks. People who had once admired Michael Carter began asking uncomfortable questions. Individuals who had previously viewed Patricia as a wise family leader started re-examining past situations through a different lens. The reputation that had taken decades to build began showing cracks that could no longer be hidden. The contrast became impossible to ignore. While Emily appeared increasingly peaceful, the Carter family seemed trapped in a cycle of consequences they never anticipated. Patricia Carter spent months attempting to repair damaged relationships. Some efforts succeeded. Many did not. People who had once accepted her version of events without question were now far more skeptical. The authority she once enjoyed no longer carried the same weight. Family members who had remained silent during difficult moments began reconsidering their own choices. Some reached out privately to Emily. A few offered apologies. Others admitted they had ignored warning signs because confronting them felt uncomfortable. Emily listened politely, but rarely discussed the past. She understood something many people never learn. Regret cannot change history. It can only influence what happens next. Rachel Brooks faced challenges of her own. The revelations from the ballroom continued to affect her long after the celebration ended. The more information she learned, the more complicated the situation appeared. Relationships built upon incomplete truths rarely survive close examination. Questions she once ignored suddenly demanded answers. Conversations she once accepted without hesitation now sounded different in retrospect. Over time, she began recognizing contradictions she had previously overlooked. The realization was painful. Nobody enjoys discovering they have been operating with only part of the truth. Yet that realization also gave her something valuable. Perspective. For the first time, she began evaluating events based on facts rather than promises. Months later, an unexpected development surprised nearly everyone connected to the story. Several relatives from the Carter family quietly contacted Emily Carter, not because they wanted financial assistance, not because they hoped to gain favor. They reached out because they genuinely wanted to rebuild relationships damaged by years of assumptions and misunderstandings. Some conversations were brief. Others lasted hours. In those discussions, Emily learned something important. Not everyone within the family had supported what happened. Some simply lacked the courage to speak against it. Others convinced themselves it wasn't their responsibility. Neither excuse made the silence acceptable, but it helped explain it. Human nature is complicated. People often recognize problems long before they find the strength to confront them. One evening, nearly a year after the ballroom confrontation, Emily attended a charity event supporting educational programs for young entrepreneurs. The gathering was significantly smaller than the celebration where everything had unraveled. There were no dramatic speeches, no family conflicts, no hidden agendas, just people working together toward a meaningful cause. During the event, someone approached Emily and asked a question she had heard countless times over the previous months. Looking back, do you wish you had exposed everything sooner? The question followed her everywhere. For a moment, Emily considered the answer. Then she smiled. She explained that exposing the truth sooner would have changed the outcome. People would have adjusted their behavior. They would have become more careful, more strategic, more guarded. The truth would still exist, but fewer people would have revealed who they really were. As painful as the experience had been, it provided clarity she could not have gained any other way. That clarity ultimately gave her freedom. Not freedom from a marriage, not freedom from a family, freedom from uncertainty, freedom from doubt, freedom from wondering whether people valued her or simply valued what they believed she could provide. The answer, once hidden, had become unmistakably clear. Years later, many people would remember the ballroom confrontation as the defining moment of the story. They would remember the documents, the shocked expressions, the silence, the revelations. Yet Emily Carter remembered something else entirely. She remembered the moment she stopped seeking approval from people determined to misunderstand her. That moment changed everything. Because once she stopped measuring her worth through the opinions of others, their power over her disappeared. As for Michael Carter, the lessons from that night followed him long after the guests went home. Wealth can be rebuilt. Careers can recover. Reputations can sometimes be repaired. But certain opportunities appear only once. Certain relationships cannot be restored after trust is broken. The greatest loss he suffered was never recorded in legal documents or financial statements. It was the loss of someone who genuinely believed in him before anyone else did. By the time he understood that, the opportunity to protect it was gone. And perhaps that is the real reason this story continues to resonate with so many people. On the surface, it appears to be a story about money, ownership, and family betrayal. But beneath those events lies something much more universal. It is a story about assumptions, about taking people for granted, about confusing kindness with weakness, about believing loyalty will always remain available regardless of how it is treated. The Carter family spent years believing Emily Carter needed them. The truth was exactly the opposite. And when that truth finally emerged, it changed every life connected to it. Some gained wisdom, some gained regret, some gained perspective. But none of them ever forgot the night a woman everyone underestimated stood up in a crowded ballroom and calmly revealed that the entire story had been wrong from the very beginning. And now we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Emily Carter's position, would you have revealed the truth sooner, or would you have waited until the right moment? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story kept you watching until the end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories just like this one.